Trusting in God's plan is one of the most powerful ways to release worry and embrace peace. Life often presents us with challenges, uncertainties, and situations that seem beyond our control. In these moments, it's natural to feel overwhelmed, anxious, or even fearful of what's ahead. But when we choose to trust that God has a greater purpose for everything we go through, we can shift our perspective and experience a sense of calm even in the midst of chaos. One of the biggest reasons people struggle with worry is the desire for control. We want to know what's coming next. We want to be certain that things will work out in our favor. We spend countless hours overanalyzing, predicting, and planning, believing that if we just think about it long enough, we can secure a favorable outcome. But the truth is, no amount of worrying will change the future. In fact, worrying only robs us of the present moment and steals our peace. Instead of trying to control everything, we must learn to trust that God already has it figured out. He sees the bigger picture that we cannot see. He knows the path ahead, and His plans are always for our good, even when we don't understand them. Trusting in God's plan doesn't mean that life will always be easy or that we won't face difficulties. What it does mean is that we don't have to carry the weight of our worries alone. When we surrender our concerns to Him, we acknowledge that He is in control, not us. This surrender isn't a sign of weakness, it's an act of faith. It's choosing to believe that even when things don't make sense, God is still working behind the scenes for our benefit. He is aligning situations, preparing opportunities, and leading us towards something greater than we could ever imagine. A perfect example of trusting God's plan can be seen in stories throughout the Bible. One well-known story is that of Joseph. He was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and later thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. From a human perspective, his life seemed unfair, full of hardship, and without hope. But what Joseph didn't know in those difficult moments was that God had a plan all along. Every trial he endured was positioning him for something greater. Eventually, he became a ruler in Egypt and was able to save countless lives, including his own family, during a time of famine. Looking back, Joseph himself acknowledged that what others meant for harm, God used for good. This same principle applies to our lives today. There are moments when we feel like we've been forgotten, when things don't go according to our plans, or when we face setbacks that seem to have no purpose, but God is always working, even when we don't see it. He is orchestrating events in ways that are beyond our understanding. The very thing we worry about today could be the stepping stone to something greater tomorrow. One of the most powerful ways to strengthen our trust in God's plan is through prayer. When we bring our worries to Him, we are reminded that we are not alone. Prayer shifts our focus from our problems to God's power. It allows us to release the burdens we were never meant to carry and receive the peace that comes from knowing He is in control. Another way to trust in His plan is by reflecting on past experiences where He has been faithful. How many times have we looked back and realized that what we once worried about actually worked out in ways we couldn't have predicted? God has been faithful before, and He will be faithful again. Remembering His goodness gives us confidence to trust Him with whatever we are facing today. Ultimately, trusting in God's plan is a daily choice. It requires faith, patience, and the willingness to let go of our desire for certainty. But when we do, we experience the freedom of knowing that we don't have to figure everything out on our own. God is guiding us, leading us, and walking beside us every step of the way. Worry has a way of creeping into our minds and taking control of our thoughts. It starts with a small concern, then grows into something bigger as we dwell on all the possible negative outcomes. The more we overthink, the more anxious we become, and before we know it, we are trapped in a cycle of stress and fear. But there is a powerful alternative to overthinking: prayer. Instead of allowing worry to consume us, we can choose to bring our concerns to God in prayer. This simple yet profound shift changes everything because it takes the burden off our shoulders and places it in God's hands. Prayer is not just about asking for things, it's about connection. It's about coming before God with an open heart, laying down our fears and trusting that He hears us. When we pray, we acknowledge that we cannot handle everything on our own, and that's okay. God never intended for us to carry the weight of the world by ourselves. He invites us to bring our burdens to Him, promising that when we do, we will find peace. This peace is unlike anything the world can offer. It's not based on circumstances or temporary relief. It's a deep, lasting peace that comes from knowing that God is in control. One of the reasons overthinking is so harmful is because it makes us feel stuck. We replay conversations, worry about things we cannot change, and try to predict the future. This mental exhaustion steals our joy and keeps us from being fully present in the moment. But when we pray, instead of overthinking, we shift our focus from the problem to the one who holds the solution. Prayer reminds us that we are not alone and that God is actively working on our behalf. Even when we don't see immediate answers, we can trust that He is moving in ways we cannot yet understand. There are countless examples in the Bible of people who turn to prayer instead of allowing worry to take over. One powerful example is found in Philippians 4:6-7, which says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This passage is a direct invitation to replace anxiety with prayer. It doesn't say, try not to worry or ignore your problems. Instead, it tells us exactly what to do. Pray about everything. And when we do, God promises to give us peace beyond our understanding. Imagine the relief of knowing that we don't have to figure everything out. We don't have to have all the answers or solve every problem on our own. When we choose prayer over worry, we surrender our need for control and allow God to work in His perfect timing. This doesn't mean that all our problems will disappear overnight, but it does mean that we don't have to face them alone. Another key aspect of replacing overthinking with prayer is learning to trust God's timing. Often our worries stem from wanting immediate answers or solutions. We want to know what will happen next. And when things don't move as quickly as we'd like, we start to panic. But God's timing is always perfect. He sees the bigger picture that we cannot see, and He knows exactly when and how to answer our prayers. When we pray, we are reminded to be patient and to trust that He is working, even when it doesn't feel like it. One practical way to develop the habit of praying instead of overthinking is to create a routine of turning to God whenever worry starts to rise. This can be as simple as pausing for a moment, taking a deep breath, and whispering a prayer. It can be writing down concerns in a prayer journal, speaking them out loud, or simply sitting in silence, allowing God's presence to bring comfort. The more we do this, the more natural it becomes to rely on prayer instead of spiraling into anxiety. Ultimately, choosing prayer over overthinking is an act of faith. It's believing that God hears us, cares for us, and is actively working in our lives. It's choosing to release control and trust that no matter what happens, we are held in His hands. When we develop this habit, we experience a profound transformation, not because our circumstances always change immediately, but because our hearts do. Instead of being weighed down by worry, we are lifted up by peace. Instead of feeling stuck in our own thoughts, we are freed by the assurance that God is with us, guiding us and making a way. Letting go of control is one of the hardest things for most people to do. We live in a world that teaches us to take charge, plan everything, and ensure we have a firm grip on our future. Society encourages us to have backup plans, predict outcomes, and avoid uncertainty at all costs. But life doesn't always go according to plan. Unexpected events happen, situations change, and despite our best efforts, we often find ourselves facing things that are completely out of our control. This is where faith comes in. Instead of holding on so tightly to the need to control everything, we are called to surrender, to let go and trust that God is in control. Surrendering doesn't mean giving up or being passive. It means recognizing that our strength alone is not enough, but God's strength is. It means accepting that no matter how much we plan or prepare, there are some things only God can handle. We spend so much time stressing over things that were never meant to be in our hands in the first place. The more we try to control everything, the more exhausted and frustrated we become. But when we release that control and trust God instead, we experience a peace that is beyond our understanding. One of the biggest reasons people struggle with letting go is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear that if we don't hold on tightly, everything will fall apart. But the reality is, we are not in control of the universe. God is. He sees the full picture when we can only see a small part. He knows what is best for us, even when we think we do. Holding on to control is often a reflection of our lack of trust in Him. When we cling to control, we are essentially saying that we trust ourselves more than we trust God. But if we truly believe that He is loving, all-powerful, and always working for our good, then we can confidently place our lives in His hands. The Bible is filled with stories of people who had to learn to let go of control and trust God. One of the most powerful examples is Abraham. God called Abraham to leave his home, his family, and everything familiar to go to an unknown land. Abraham had no detailed plan, no clear picture of what was ahead, just a promise from God. If Abraham had insisted on knowing every step before taking action, he never would have moved. But because he trusted God, he stepped out in faith, and God led him to a destiny greater than he could have imagined. This same principle applies to our lives today. When we let go of our need for control and trust that God is guiding us, we open ourselves up to a life filled with purpose, peace, and divine direction. Letting go also means releasing the burden of worrying about outcomes. We often stress over things that may never even happen. We play out worst-case scenarios in our minds, trying to prepare for every possibility. But Jesus himself reminds us in Matthew 6:34, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." When we trust God, we understand that we don't have to figure everything out today. He already has the future in his hands. Instead of trying to control every detail, we can focus on what he is doing in the present moment. A practical way to start letting go is through prayer. Every time anxiety or the need for control rises up, we can bring it to God and ask him to take over. Instead of dwelling on what we can't fix, we can surrender it to the one who can. Another way is by reminding ourselves of times in the past when we saw God's faithfulness. How many times have we worried about something only to later realize that God was working it out all along? When we reflect on his goodness, we build our confidence to trust him more. Letting go of control is not a one-time decision, it's a daily choice. It's waking up each day and deciding that no matter what happens, we will trust God. It's learning to release our grip on the things we cannot change and resting in the assurance that God is in control. The more we surrender, the more peace we experience. Instead of carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders, we can walk in freedom, knowing that God is leading, guiding, and taking care of us every step of the way. Fear is one of the greatest obstacles to living a life of faith. It creeps in quietly, filling our minds with doubt and uncertainty. It makes us question whether things will work out, whether we are capable, and whether God is truly in control. Fear magnifies problems, makes challenges seem insurmountable, and keeps us stuck in a cycle of worry. But faith is the antidote to fear. When we choose to focus on faith instead of fear, everything changes. We begin to see obstacles as opportunities, setbacks as setups for something greater, and uncertainty as a chance to trust God more deeply. One of the biggest reasons fear takes hold of our hearts is because we focus too much on our limitations and not enough on God's power. We look at our circumstances and feel overwhelmed. We think about the things that could go wrong, the ways we might fail, or the uncertainty of the future. But faith calls us to shift our focus. Instead of looking at the problem, we are called to look at the one who is bigger than any problem we will ever face. Fear says, what if it doesn't work out? Faith says, even if I don't see the way, God is making a way. A great example of this can be found in the story of Peter walking on water. When Jesus called Peter to step out of the boat and walk towards him, Peter had enough faith to take the first steps. But as soon as he shifted his focus from Jesus to the wind and the waves around him, fear took over and he began to sink. The moment Peter allowed fear to replace his faith, he lost his ability to do the impossible. This is what happens to all of us. As long as we keep our eyes on God, we can move forward with confidence. But the second we start focusing on the challenges, the unknowns, and our own limitations, fear takes over and we begin to sink into doubt, anxiety, and inaction. One of the reasons faith is so powerful is that it allows us to live in alignment with God's promises. Throughout the Bible, God consistently reassures his people with the words, "Do not fear." This isn't just a suggestion, it's a command. Fear paralyzes us, but faith moves us forward. Fear keeps us trapped in our comfort zones, but faith pushes us to step into the purpose God has for us. Fear makes us focus on what we lack, but faith reminds us that with God we lack nothing. Overcoming fear doesn't mean we will never feel afraid. It means we won't let fear control us. There will always be moments in life when we feel uncertain or nervous about what's ahead, but instead of allowing those feelings to dictate our actions, we can choose to trust in God's plan. Faith is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to move forward despite it. It is the choice to say, I may not have all the answers, but I know God is with me, and that is enough. One way to build our faith and overcome fear is by meditating on God's promises. The Bible is filled with verses that remind us of his faithfulness, his protection, and his love. Verses like Isaiah 41:10, which says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." When we fill our minds with these truths, fear loses its power over us. Another way to replace fear with faith is through action. Sometimes the best way to overcome fear is to do the very thing we are afraid of, trusting that God will sustain us. Fear thrives in hesitation, but faith grows when we step forward, even when we don't see the whole path. Every time we take a step of faith, we build spiritual muscle, and over time, fear has less and less control over us. Ultimately, faith is a choice. It is choosing to believe that God is greater than our fears, that His plans for us are good, and that He will never leave us. When we make this choice daily, we begin to experience the freedom, peace, and confidence that come from fully trusting in Him. Instead of being held back by fear, we can step into the life God has called us to live, knowing that no matter what happens, He is always with us. Living in the present is one of the greatest challenges in a world that constantly pulls our attention in different directions. We often find ourselves dwelling on the past, replaying mistakes, regretting missed opportunities, or holding on to pain. At the same time, we anxiously look ahead to the future, worrying about things that haven't even happened yet. The result is that we miss the beauty, peace, and opportunities of the present moment. But when we truly trust God, we can let go of the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future and embrace the now, knowing that He is with us every step of the way. One of the main reasons people struggle to live in the present is because they are trapped by their past. They carry guilt, shame, and regret over things they wish they had done differently. They replay old conversations, wonder how life would have turned out if they had made different choices, and allow past wounds to dictate their present emotions. But the truth is, no matter how much we think about the past, we cannot change it. What we can do is trust that God's grace is bigger than our mistakes. He is not holding our past against us. He is offering us freedom from it. When we truly believe that God has forgiven us, we can forgive ourselves and move forward with peace. On the other hand, some people live in constant anxiety about the future. They worry about what will happen next, if they will succeed, if things will work out, or if unexpected challenges will arise. This kind of thinking robs them of the joy and peace available to them right now. Jesus Himself addressed this in Matthew 6:34 when He said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." In other words, worrying about the future does nothing to change it, it only steals from today. When we trust God, we realize that we don't have to have all the answers right now. We don't have to figure everything out on our own. We can rest in the truth that God is already in our future, preparing the way for us. Living in the present requires faith. It means believing that God is at work in our lives right now, even when we don't see it. It means slowing down enough to recognize His presence in the small things, the kindness of a stranger, the beauty of nature, the laughter of a loved one. So often we are in such a rush to get to the next thing that we miss the gifts God has placed right in front of us. But when we choose to focus on today, we become more aware of His blessings, His guidance, and His love. One way to practice living in the present is through gratitude. When we intentionally take time to thank God for what we have right now, our perspective shifts. Instead of dwelling on what's missing or what could go wrong, we begin to see how much we have to be thankful for. Gratitude grounds us in the moment, reminding us that even in difficult seasons, there is something good to appreciate. Another way to stay present is by surrendering our worries to God. Every time anxious thoughts about the future arise, we can choose to hand them over to Him in prayer. Instead of letting our minds spiral into fear and overthinking, we can remind ourselves that God is in control. The more we do this, the more natural it becomes to trust Him with what's ahead and focus on the here and now. Ultimately, living in the present is about faith and trust. It's believing that God has already taken care of the past, that He is handling the future, and that today is a gift. When we stop letting worry and regret consume us, we create space to experience the peace, joy, and purpose that God has for us in this very moment. Life is happening right now. God is moving right now. And when we open our hearts to that truth, we find the freedom to fully embrace the present. True peace is something that many people long for, but struggle to find. In a world filled with chaos, uncertainty, and constant pressure, peace often feels out of reach. We try to find it in success, relationships, financial stability, or even in controlling every aspect of our lives. But no matter how hard we try, external circumstances can never give us lasting peace. That's because real peace doesn't come from what's happening around us. It comes from trusting God completely. When we place our faith in Him, we discover a peace that is not dependent on situations, but is rooted in the unshakable truth that God is in control. Many people live their lives searching for peace in the wrong places. They believe that if they can just fix one more problem, achieve one more goal, or eliminate every source of stress, then they will finally feel at rest. But as soon as one problem is solved, another one appears. As soon as one goal is reached, a new one takes its place. This cycle keeps people constantly striving, never fully able to enjoy the present moment because they are always chasing after